Imagine you didn't inherit a castle, and you didn't inherit a tavern. Instead, you inherited a leaking wooden sloop, 32 angry men, for rusty cannons, and exactly one piece of paper that determines whether you're a national hero or a dead man swinging from a rope. Welcome to the pirate business. Right now, in the year 1715, off the coast of the Bahamas, you are about to become the CEO of one of the most misunderstood companies in economic history. Hollywood shows you buried treasure, eye patches, and parrots. What Hollywood doesn't show you is the balance sheet. Because underneath the skull and crossbones, a pirate ship was a business. A brutal, high-risk, high-reward, employee-owned business with a written constitution, a profit-sharing plan, and a workers' compensation program that would make a modern HR department blush. Today, we are breaking down the actual economics of owning a pirate ship, the startup costs, the labor model, the insurance nightmare, and the one heist so massive it made an entire crew rich for life. Grab a cutlass. This is the economics of owning a pirate ship. Why does this job even exist right now, in 1715? Simple economics. The War of the Spanish Succession just ended, and it dumped tens of thousands of trained sailors and privateers out of a job at once. The Navy doesn't need them anymore. Merchant shipping doesn't need nearly as many of them either. So you have a massive oversupply of exactly the skill set required to run a pirate ship. Men who already know how to sail, fight, and follow a chain of command, and who suddenly have zero legitimate income. This is the labor supply shock that kicks off what historians call the golden age of piracy. It's less a crime wave and more a mass layoff turning into a very violent gig economy. Let's start with your very first problem. You don't have a shipyard. Nobody is going to sell a fully rigged warship to a random criminal off the docks. So how do you actually get your first ship? Option 1. Mutiny. You are currently crew on a merchant vessel or a Royal Navy ship. Conditions are brutal, pay is worse, and one night, enough of the crew decides the captain goes over the side, and the ship becomes yours. This is actually how most pirate careers begin. Not with buying a ship, with stealing one you were already standing on. Option 2. You capture a smaller vessel first, a little sloop, and use it to hunt bigger prey, upgrading ship by ship, until you're commanding something with real firepower. Now, what kind of ship do you actually want? Big is not better. A massive galleon looks intimidating, but it's slow, it needs a huge crew to sail, and it draws too much water to hide in the shallow coves and inlets where you'll be running from the Navy. What you actually want is a sloop. Small, fast, shallow draft, easy to maneuver with a skeleton crew. In the pirate economy, speed is your most valuable asset, because 90% of your job is running away, not fighting. Once you have your ship, step 1 is retrofitting it. You cut extra gun ports into the hull to fit more cannons than the ship was originally designed for. You strip out unnecessary cargo space. You reinforce the deck. This isn't a merchant ship anymore. This is a floating weapons platform. Now here's your biggest legal decision. There are 2 ways to do this job. Path 1, piracy. You attack anyone, any flag, any nation, for your own profit. If caught, you are hanged. No trial needed beyond a formality. Path 2, privateering. You get a government to issue you a letter of marque, a legal document that makes you a licensed contractor of war. As a privateer, you're legally allowed to attack enemy ships during wartime, and you get to keep a share of what you capture, with the crown taking a cut off the top. Same ship, same cannons, same violence. The only difference between a war hero and a criminal executed at dawn is a single signed piece of paper. Naturally, a huge number of privateers just quietly ignored the fine print on that letter and attacked whoever they wanted anyway. The line between the 2 jobs was thinner than anyone likes to admit. Your core capital expenditures, the ship itself, somewhere between free, if stolen, and several £100s if bought secondhand. Cannons, which are absurdly expensive. A single bronze cannon could cost more than a small house. Gunpowder, which you burn through constantly, and which is one of your biggest recurring costs. And small arms. Cutlasses, pistols, and muskets for every man aboard, because in a boarding action, cannons stop mattering the second the 2 hulls touch. Some voyages, especially privateering ones, are backed by onshore investors, wealthy merchants who put up the money for the ship and provisions in exchange for a cut of whatever's captured. It's essentially private venture funding for an extremely dangerous startup, and if the voyage comes back empty-handed, those investors simply eat the loss, exactly like backing a startup that fails to find product-market fit. There's one more piece of equipment that costs you almost nothing to make, and might be the single best return on investment item on the entire ship: your flag. The black flag, the so-called Jolly Roger, isn't decoration. It's a negotiating tool. When a merchant captain sees that flag rising up your mast, The entire economic calculation on his ship changes instantly. He knows that if he surrenders immediately, without a fight, pirate custom generally treats his crew far better. If he resists and loses anyway, it goes much worse for him. So merchant ships surrender constantly, the second they see the flag, without a single cannon fired. That means you don't burn expensive gunpowder, you don't damage the cargo you're about to steal, and you don't risk your own crew getting killed or wounded, which, remember, you'd have to pay out under your own disability policy. A well-known, terrifying reputation is, in cold economic terms, one of the cheapest and most effective assets you can own. Now let's talk about your workforce, because this is where pirate economics gets genuinely revolutionary for its time. A single pirate ship might carry anywhere from 20 to over 150 men, far more than a merchant vessel of the same size would ever need, because in a fight, or a boarding action, sheer numbers win. But every one of those men also eats, drinks, and expects a share of the plunder. So a bigger crew doesn't just mean more firepower, it means every prize has to be split more ways to keep everyone paid. There is no salary. Not one single crew member draws a wage. The entire business runs on one brutal principle: no prey, no pay. If you don't capture anything, nobody eats a paycheck. Everyone's income is 100% commission, tied directly to performance. It is the single purest incentive-aligned business model in the 18th century. But here's the surprising part. Before the ship even leaves port, the crew sits down and writes a contract. It's called the ship's articles, and every single man signs it, often in his own blood, for dramatic effect. This document lays out exactly how profits are split, how discipline works, what happens if you're injured, and how decisions get made. It is, essentially, the company's founding legal charter, written and ratified by the workers themselves. The articles didn't just cover pay. They covered workplace conduct too. Common rules included: no gambling for money aboard ship, since debts caused constant fights. Lights and candles out by 8 at night, to prevent accidental fires below deck. Always the #1 threat on a wooden ship soaked in gunpowder. No bringing women or boys aboard in disguise, a rule aimed at reducing jealousy-driven violence within the crew. And absolutely no fighting between crew members while at sea. Personal disputes were required to be settled on land instead, once the ship was safely anchored. It reads less like a criminal code and more like an unusually strict employee handbook, enforced by men who also carried swords. Here's how the shares typically break down. The captain usually gets 1.5 to 2 shares of the total plunder. Not 10 times more, like a modern CEO. Just 1.5 times more than an ordinary sailor. The quartermaster, who is arguably the second most powerful man on the ship, gets almost as much as the captain. Specialists like the ship's carpenter or surgeon might get an extra share or a bonus, because their skills are scarce and valuable. A ship's surgeon in particular is worth paying extra for. Amputations, gunshot wounds, and infection are constant realities, and a trained surgeon aboard meaningfully raises your crew's survival odds. Captured surgeons were sometimes forced into service against their will, since a skilled one was hard to find and even harder to replace mid-voyage. An ordinary sailor gets 1 full share, and a young or new crew member, a so-called ship's boy, gets half a share. Now here's the part that sounds shockingly modern. Pirate crews had a workers' compensation program. If you lost your right arm in battle, the articles specified you'd be paid a fixed sum, sometimes as much as 600 pieces of 8. Lose a leg, you get a slightly smaller fixed payout. Lose an eye or a finger, a smaller amount still. This was, effectively, a standardized disability insurance policy negotiated and agreed upon by the workforce at a time when the Royal Navy offered its own injured sailors essentially nothing. And here's the truly radical part. The captain was elected by popular vote of the crew, and the captain could be voted out or even physically thrown off the ship if the crew decided he was incompetent or too tyrannical. On a Royal Navy ship or a merchant vessel, the captain's word was law, backed by the full authority of the state, and mutiny meant execution. On a pirate ship, the captain only had absolute authority during an active battle. The rest of the time, major decisions, like where to sail or which ship to attack, were settled by a vote. So who actually checks the captain's power day to day? That's the quartermaster's job. The quartermaster distributes food and plunder, settles disputes between crew members, and can literally overrule the captain on questions of ship discipline. 2 separate power centers, elected by the same workforce. And despite what a few centuries of adventure novels tell you, walking the plank was almost never an actual punishment. It's a colorful invention that shows up mostly in fiction written more than a century after the Golden Age ended. Real pirate discipline was blunter and far less theatrical: flogging, marooning on an island, or simply being shot on the spot. No plank required. Now let's talk overhead, because keeping this ship running is its own nightmare. Food. You're eating salted pork, salted beef, and something called hardtack, a rock-hard biscuit that keeps almost indefinitely, largely because nothing, including weevils, wants to eat it either. Rum, or watered-down rum called grog, is rationed daily, not as a luxury, but because it disguises the taste of spoiled water and delivers fast calories at the cost of a crew that is very frequently, functionally, drunk while operating a heavily armed sailing vessel. Fresh food runs out within days at sea, and once it does, your crew's health starts deteriorating fast, from scurvy, from dysentery, from simple malnutrition. Then there's the hull. Every few months, you have to careen the ship, which means finding a secluded beach, deliberately tipping the ship on its side at low tide, and scraping off the barnacles and shipworms that have been eating away at the wood below the waterline. This is a maintenance cost with no modern equivalent in terms of vulnerability, because for the 2 or 3 days your ship is beached and tipped over, you cannot sail, you cannot fight, and if a Navy patrol finds you in this position, you are finished. Rigging and sails wear out constantly from salt water and wind, and repairs require rope, canvas, and tar, all of which you either have to buy from a sympathetic port or capture from someone else's ship. And there's no insurance. None. If your ship sinks in a storm, or gets captured, or runs aground, you don't file a claim. You lose everything. Every voyage is a fully uninsured, all-or-nothing bet against the ocean and the world's navies simultaneously. So, with all this overhead, how do you actually make money? Revenue Stream 1, prize ships. You capture a merchant vessel, and you take everything. The cargo, which might be sugar, cloth, spices, or coin, and often the ship itself, which you can sail as a second vessel, sell, or scrap for parts. Revenue Stream 2, ransom. If you capture a ship carrying a wealthy passenger, a merchant, a colonial official, sometimes even an admiral, you don't kill them. You hold them for ransom, and let their family or their company pay to get them back. A single wealthy prisoner can be worth more than an entire cargo hold of ordinary goods. Revenue Stream 3, protection money. This one barely gets talked about, but it's hugely important. Coastal fishing villages and small trading posts would sometimes pay pirates directly, a recurring fee, essentially protection money, in exchange for a guarantee that their boats wouldn't be raided. It's a subscription revenue model, 17th century style. Revenue Stream 4, the black market. You can't just sail into a major port city and sell stolen silk on the open market. Instead, you sell your plunder through corrupt colonial governors and merchants in lightly regulated ports, who will happily buy stolen goods at a steep discount, no questions asked, and take their own cut for looking the other way. This is, functionally, money laundering, powered entirely by local government corruption. None of this works without somewhere to actually dock. You need pirate havens, essentially unregulated free ports where a wanted criminal can safely resupply, repair, recruit crew, and sell plunder without getting arrested. Places like Nassau, in the Bahamas, which for a period essentially operates as a self-governing pirate stronghold with no effective colonial authority at all, or a remote base off the coast of Madagascar, perfectly positioned along the shipping lanes of the Indian Ocean. These havens function like an entire supporting industry. Tavern keepers, ship's carpenters, and merchants who buy stolen goods, all of whom depend economically on a steady flow of pirate crews spending freshly stolen money as fast as they earn it. It's an entire regional economy built downstream of piracy, not unlike a company town, except the company is committing felonies. Geography matters enormously here too. The single most lucrative hunting ground isn't the Caribbean. It's actually a much longer and more dangerous route called the Pirate Route, sailing all the way around Africa into the Indian Ocean to intercept heavily loaded treasure ships and East India trading vessels. It's a longer voyage, it's riskier, and provisions cost more because you're at sea for months at a time. But the potential cargo, gold, silk, spices, jewels, dwarfs anything you'd find robbing a sugar ship in the Caribbean. High risk, longer runway, but a dramatically bigger potential payout, which is exactly the kind of trade-off that drew the most ambitious captains east instead of staying close to home. And then, every so often, there's the jackpot. In 1695, a pirate captain intercepted a single Mogul treasure ship in the Indian Ocean and captured a haul so massive, estimates run into the hundreds of thousands of pounds in gold, silver, and jewels, that it remains, adjusted for inflation, one of the largest single robberies in recorded history. Adjusted into modern terms, that single haul is sometimes estimated at the equivalent of well over $100 million today, split among a crew of only a few hundred men. It is very possibly still the single largest cash windfall any individual pirate crew member has ever received in history. This heist was so enormous it triggered a global manhunt, one of the first in history with a bounty this large, and it nearly destroyed diplomatic relations between England and the Mughal Empire. That heist is the pirate equivalent of a startup unicorn exit. It happened to almost nobody, but it happened to just enough people that everyone kept signing up for the job. Now let's talk about the other side of the ledger. The risk that this entire business is built on top of. The Royal Navy is actively hunting you. Patrol ships, bounty postings, and, if you're caught, a trial that usually ends in a hanging at a public dock, followed by your body being tarred and hung in a gibbet cage as a warning to other sailors. This isn't a fine or a jail sentence. This is capital punishment as your regulatory downside. Historians estimate that during the peak years of the crackdown that followed, several hundred pirates were captured and executed within just a few years, a fatality rate for the profession that would be considered an unthinkable liability in almost any other line of work in human history. By 1718, the British government has had enough. It sends a former privateer, now appointed governor, to Nassau with a royal commission and a small fleet, offering every pirate there a choice: accept the king's pardon and walk away clean, or refuse and be hunted down under a newly strengthened piracy law that streamlines prosecution and makes convictions faster and easier to secure. Some pirates take the deal. Many don't, and the ones who refuse are, over the following decade, systematically hunted down, tried, and publicly executed, in numbers large enough to functionally end the golden age of piracy as an industry by around 1730. It's less a single dramatic battle and more a sustained regulatory crackdown, a targeted government campaign that simply out-resourced the entire criminal sector until it collapsed. And the risk isn't only external. Because the captain's power is limited and the crew can vote, mutiny is a constant internal threat too. If the crew decides the captain is being too cautious, too greedy with the shares, or simply unlucky, they can vote him out on the spot, sometimes marooning him on a deserted island with nothing but a pistol and a single shot, a fate considered worse than death by most sailors of the era. Add up disease, storms, naval combat, executions, and mutiny, and the average active career of a pirate during this era was shockingly short, often just 1 to 3 years, before ending in death, capture, or a very quiet retirement under a fake name. So add it all up. Was owning a pirate ship actually profitable? For the overwhelming majority of crew members, not really. Most pirates lived rough, ate worse, died young, from disease or combat or the noose, and never saw anything close to life-changing money. It was a high-variance, low-median outcome business, propped up entirely by stories of the rare crew that hit the jackpot. But for the very small percentage who survived long enough, captured the right ship, and got out at the right time, it could produce genuinely enormous, multi-generational wealth, all built on a business model with no wages, a written employee-voted constitution, built-in disability insurance, an elected and removable captain, zero insurance on the core asset, and one of the highest job fatality rates in recorded economic history. It is, in almost every way, the original high-risk startup. The next time somebody complains about their company's equity vesting schedule, just remind them, at least nobody's making them careen a ship on a beach while a Navy frigate sails over the horizon.